Deaths from fentanyl overdoses in the United States continue to rise as more communities feel the impact of the deadliest illicit drug epidemic in American history. The Economist recently had an article on fentanyl that observed that now we view the slowing in the increase in overdose deaths as success. Like more people dying just at a slower rate is something to pat ourselves on the back for. It seems like we've almost given up on actually diminishing the incalculable harm that this drug is doing to our children and our nation. Hi, I'm Karla Jones, Senior Director of Federalism, Homeland Security, and International Relations at ALEC.
Hi, I'm Brooklyn Roberts, Senior Director of the Health and Human Services Task Force. We have two very special people with us today to talk about the impact of the fentanyl overdose epidemic on American families. Deena Loudon, mother of Matthew Loudon, and ambassador at Shatterproof, an organization dedicated to transforming our healthcare system and society to treat addiction with science and compassion. And her friend, Tina Bell, who also lost a child to the fentanyl overdose. So welcome, Tina and Deena.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you both so much for joining us. And it's great to see you again, Deena, and give our best to Paula. You told us about your son, Matthew, last year, and that video is still available on the ALEC website. Would you like to give our listeners an idea of who Matthew was, what kind of kid, what interests he had? I remember you're mentioning something about the relationship that he had with his grandmother. We want to understand Matthew a little better because he was such a special young man.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that. Matthew was my pride and joy. As crazy as it sounds, we learned so much about Matthew the day of his funeral from his friends who showed up in abundance and spoke about Matthew and what their friendships meant to him or them. So I would say that he was really an extraordinary friend. Most of his friends were his friends from kindergarten on up until the day that he passed away. He had an extreme love for hockey, and I'm so grateful that he got to see our Washington Capitals win the Stanley Cup in 2018. He even actually, his first tattoo was a humongous Stanley Cup on his ribs.
Oh my gosh.
Which I'm sure hurt like the devil. But yeah, and as far as his relationship with his grandmother, I'm sure that other people have relationships with grandparents as Matthew did, but there was just something really special. My parents both lived about 1.5 miles away from us, and as soon as Matthew really was able to talk and understand dialing a telephone, he would pretty much call my mom every Sunday and ask her to pick him up and bring him over there. Sometimes I think he liked her more than he liked me. But at 2 years old, Matthew could recite the Nestle Toll House chocolate chip recipe by memory, because that was one of the things that they did together, and baking together and cooking together continued, throughout Matthew's life. But he put the needs of others before the needs of himself. And, I think that was a quality about him that just really stood out. And people said, at his funeral as they were talking about him. So, aside from being an amazing son and amazing brother to my daughter Jillian and our oldest Ryan, he just he would do anything for anybody.
And that grandmother point particularly resonates with me because I know my mother far preferred my two daughters to me. And Tina, I want to thank you for joining us here today. I understand that you also lost a son to this horrible drug. Could you tell us about Brandon and share a little bit about what happened? Because I think it's important for people to understand that the lives that we're losing here are so much more than how these kids ended up dying, than the substance that killed them. They had these wonderful, vibrant lives, and these lives were cut short.
I totally agree. To piggyback on what Deena said real quick, I didn't realize either how many lives Brandon had touched until his service. It's crazy. It made me feel almost like a better mother, because I was like, wow, I raised this person who interacted with all these people that came out and that were sad to see him. And to this day, they still contact me. It's been 4 years and I'm still contacted by many of them to see how I'm doing and to see how his brothers are doing. Brandon was my firstborn. He just was an absolute joy. He did well in everything. He tried multiple sports and then he settled on football. And he truly was all about football once he hit high school. And he had a growth spurt and the coaches wanted him. And he ended up being the quarterback for his senior team. And he just was very popular and really just a joy to be around. He really just lit up a room. He had a big, beautiful smile and just wonderful. And he tore his ACL and meniscus prior to his first college, when they were practicing for college ball. And through the surgery, he discovered Percocet. And once he was unable to get it prescribed for him anymore, he turned to finding them on the street, which eventually led to his overdose. He had surgery in 2016 and he was gone in 2019. It was very quick. We really had very little idea that he had a problem. And by then it was not quite too late, but we couldn't get through to him to get the help that may have saved him. The impact is it will never go away. I mean, today feels like it just happened. It never feels like the years have passed. The years fly in some ways and just drag in others. I mean, it still feels like yesterday. And Deena and I both found our children. So there's a little bit of a different impact there. The one place you feel like they're going to be safest is the place that they end up not being the safest. And so it's a little bit about Brandon.
The impact of these overdose deaths have a ripple effect throughout just the immediate family. So can you tell us, Deena, a little bit about how this impacted your family and the people around you?
I'm really glad that you recognize that. And I'd have to say two significant things come to mind. And, I do want to stress that it's not just mom and dad who are affected, and siblings. It's, their friends and our extended family. I mean, one of the things that I think is a really hard thing to swallow is my mom was diagnosed with Parkinson's in Matthew's kindergarten year. And when Matthew passed away, my mom really just started giving up. Matthew was really her reason to keep fighting this horrible disease. And without Matthew in her world, she just kind of lost her sense of purpose and her sense of being, even though, she's still happily married to my dad. And she had other grandchildren and her children. It just, he was her world. And so she gave up. And by 2022, she passed away. So, that was really hard to watch. And I had to remind my mom at times that, Matthew was okay where he was and that we needed her here and not with him. so that she needed to do what she needed to do to keep fighting her fight. But the other significant thing is my daughter Jillian has a chronic illness that is really set off by stress. And you can imagine the stress level from losing her brother. They were only 16 months apart, so very close in age. And that sort of was the onset of her downfall. She's been pretty much sick ever since, on a regular basis. She's not able to work. She's not able to go to school. She's lost a lot of friends. So it's really, really impacted the extended family in so many ways. But their friends do keep in touch. Matthew's friends do keep in touch. Just like Tina was mentioning about Brandon, and that that they're traumatized to lose somebody at such a young age. It should not be happening.
Tina, would you like to tell us a little bit about the impact it's had on your family?
So it's devastating. We aren't the same parents we were before this happened. So it's a shame that we have two other boys. I have a Tanner who's almost 23, and Corey who is 21. And they lost their parents that day as well. They don't have the same parents. Everything is a concern for me now. Every time they leave the house, it's a concern for me. It's I'm lucky to have them both at home still, and I'm grateful as long as they want to stay here. They're more than welcome. Unfortunately, Tanner's my middle son. He developed his own substance use disorder after losing his brother. It was just hard for him to deal with it. So I'm also dealing with that at this point of another child that I have to be concerned about. He's been clean and sober now for going on a year, and I'm grateful for that. He's finding other ways to channel his grief, and I'm grateful for that. We don't grieve the same. Husbands and wives don't grieve the same. So I feel it has made my marriage stronger, which can sometimes have the opposite effect. But my husband and I don't grieve the same. He's more of an introvert as far as how he deals with it. He doesn't want to talk about it. I will talk about it with everyone because I want people to know. As you said in the beginning, Brandon is much more, and Matthew, they're much more than how they died. They touched this world for the short time they were here. They made an impact. And my youngest son is a lot like my husband. So my middle son and I sort of share. We talk a lot about Brandon. We talk about Brandon all the time. He's very prevalent in our lives still. He's always around somehow. But the ripple effects just will never stop. We have lost most of our grandparents. So we basically just have each other right now, but the ripple effects just carry on, and we just do the best we can day by day.
And the fentanyl epidemic has transnational roots. The precursor chemicals are manufactured in China, which are then bought by Mexican cartels that then enter the United States, often through legal points of entry, sometimes even through the mail. Brooklyn and I hosted an academy on the nexus between health issues and China. And one of the speakers that we had, Sheriff Kieran Donahue, he's the sheriff of Canyon County, Idaho. He likened what we're facing with fentanyl to a war, and that we needed to treat it like a war. And the more you look at not just fentanyl, but also TikTok, it almost seems as if China is trying to rot us from within. But I'm not ready to give up the fight, but I hear what Sheriff Donahue was saying about it being a war. Are there steps that society, local law enforcement could take to prevent Americans from dying needlessly? What would you like to see policymakers doing that they're not?
God, that's a loaded question, and I'm not even quite sure where to begin. I think what we're up against, China and the Mexican cartel, is so much bigger than us, especially as parents. But I really feel like the lawmakers need to sort of, bring the hammer down, and they need to impose much stricter laws on people that are selling it. Even if they don't know that they're selling it, the fact that they're selling in the first place, it's killing our youth, and it is a war on our youth, and we're defenseless against it. So, the other thing, my sister and I actually, we went to a bill markup down on Capitol Hill where they were trying to make fentanyl a chemical of mass destruction, and unfortunately that got squashed. But it needs to be. It is part of a war. And the other thing too, I think we can do is we need to ban TikTok. I think many of us have heard that the way that we use TikTok is completely different than how they use it in China, and the way we're using it is probably, you know, I think some of it is for fun, and some of it is okay, but it's promoting things that we have no business promoting. And I don't know if people or the kids can get the drugs through TikTok. I know that they can through Snapchat, but we just need to boycott these things and stop giving uh, China the power.
One quick word on TikTok. The algorithm that they use in China is totally different than the algorithm used in the United States. And if you look at studies of kids that are on TikTok, first of all, in China, the use is restricted to, I think it's like an hour or two a day. Second of all, kids that use TikTok in China want to grow up to be rocket scientists, quite literally. Kids that use TikTok in the United States want to grow up to be influencers. And that tells you pretty much all you need to know about TikTok and what it's doing to our young people. And I'm sorry for interrupting, Tina.
No, not at all. I'm glad that you clarified it. I don't use it. I won't watch anything on it. I try, me being a little peon in the United States, I try not to give China any kind of accolades, or I try to buy stuff in the US, things that are made in China, I try to avoid. So as silly as it sounds, and like I said, I'm such a small fish in this big ginormous ocean. What I'm doing probably doesn't have an impact, but I think making videos like this and spreading awareness is really what's going to have the impact most on people.
And Brooklyn, we're losing so many promising young people to this overdose epidemic. And I'm not ready to accept that this is our new normal. So have you seen initiatives at either the state or the federal level that you think are promising?
Back in December, the U.S. House passed the SUPPORT Act, which required all state Medicaid programs to cover medication-assisted treatment for those with opioid use disorders. I think that was a good first step in terms of helping provide access to those drugs and to those who need treatment. A lot of states are looking at getting rid of prior authorization for those drugs. That again, it provides easier access for patients. A lot of states are looking at putting Narcan, which reverses an overdose, available over the counter and requiring Medicaid to reimburse for that. And finally, just allowing the prescription of these drugs, medication-assisted treatment drugs, to be prescribed via telehealth. So I know there is a federal component of that too, but a lot of states, have amended their state prescribing laws to allow for that. Which again, it all goes back to making access to these things easier for patients.
Can I piggyback on that for just one quick second? One of the things that I've been doing here in Montgomery County, Maryland, been working with the state's attorney and going into the high schools and talking to the kids. But now a law was passed in Montgomery County, Maryland, that the kids can carry Narcan on their person. So it's not just in the nurse's office or, somewhere on a third floor where it's not easily accessible. If a kid chooses to get it, and they can carry it on them, and if there is an emergency, then they can administer it and call 911. So I think that's a really good step in the right direction.
Do you know if other counties in Maryland are doing that? And if maybe that's something that the Maryland House of Delegates could take up?
I am not certain what other counties. I don't work with any other counties when I'm doing this, and I've not heard anything, but I sure think that it should be statewide.
I agree.
Is there anything else that you'd like to share with us, Deena or Tina?
I have some things I'd like to share as far as this is affecting youth, yes, and it's also affecting all ages. The leading cause of death, between 18 to 45 is fentanyl, unless they've changed that, but that was what it was. I want to see more of them addressing the reason our children are turning to drugs. There's a difference between the child that goes to a party and tries something once because their friend is doing it, than the child that is looking for something on Snapchat or on social media to relieve their anxiety from something else that's going on in their lives. And I don't think that that's being addressed like it should be. Our kids, social media in general, TikTok is just part of it. Social media in general has put so much pressure on our children to be a certain way. And it's just, I think it's basically ruining a whole generation of kids. They're trying to attain something that doesn't exist. Everyone puts everything good on social media, on Facebook, everywhere. And our children are striving for something that they're never going to be able to get to. I would like to see that addressed, as well as, removing the stigma when something does happen and your child is addicted. I know so many families that have not even admitted how their child died because they don't want to deal with the stigma attached to it. It affects how they feel they parented their child. People will say the meanest things when they find out your child has an addiction. Addiction is a disease like anything else. You're not going to point at someone who's smoking and say you're going to get cancer and die and it's your fault and I don't feel sorry for you. Yet when it comes to addiction, they say it's a choice. And in my opinion, the only choice made is the first choice to use. And then fentanyl especially is so highly addictive, it grabs you. People don't realize that people don't die right away from using fentanyl. If you've already built up a tolerance to opioids, you can start using fentanyl. People now are addicted to fentanyl. They're seeking it out. So when you had said dealers may not know they have fentanyl, at this point, they know they have fentanyl. That's all that's available. That's all that's out there. And no one is getting rid of any real Xanax, Percocet, oxycodone, Adderall. No one is getting rid of any of the real stuff. It's all going to be fentanyl made in someone's basement. And it's the luck of the draw when someone uses it. And I think everyone is on notice at this point that that's what's happening. And unfortunately, it's just not getting the attention it needs. I hate saying the right people aren't dying, but I've said that for years. The right people aren't dying. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what else it's going to take to give this the urgency that it needs. This is killing every day, and you don't see it on the news like you should. You don't see it. It's not going to get anyone elected. It's not going to change anything. It's frustrating to no end. And I mean, I could go on and on about that. I'm just, the fentanyl test strips, people don't realize what you have to do to use a fentanyl test strip. Fentanyl is not if you go to a job and take a drug test, fentanyl is not in the panel of the drug tests. You have to look for it's a synthetic opioid. It's not picked up like anything else. So if you're getting a job and you take a drug test and you're doing fentanyl, unless they have a specific test ready to go for fentanyl, they're not going to know you're using it. People are slipping through the justice system in that. I've seen court shows where people are taking drug tests and they're testing negative, but they're using fentanyl, and the judges don't even know. And the test strips, you have to completely destroy your drugs to use the test strip. You can't just test part of it. There's so much information that people don't have, and I talk about it as much as I can just to get it out there, just to get everyone thinking, because this can literally happen to anybody. If it can happen to Deena and I, it can happen to anyone.
Mm-hmm.
It does not discriminate. It doesn't matter if you're rich or poor. And
100%.
so, sorry, but
It's frustrating, Tina. You and I have talked so much about this, and on the flip side of this, right? Not focusing on the kids, focusing on the parents. Tina and I spend a significant amount of our time, 3 and 4 years later, seeking out grief groups and doing therapy and doing what we can so that we can put one foot in front of the other and make it through each day without falling apart. And also, Tina had mentioned that her boys lost their parents that day, which says a lot, because if we can't get the support that we need and this keeps happening, so many children are going to not be losing a sibling, but losing their parents as well. So we need to be out there. We need to be in front of the world. We need to be shouting this from the rooftops. And when I do these talks through Montgomery County with the state's attorney, a lot of times they'll have a parents only. And it is so frustrating because there's such a no-show. And it can happen to them. I think, when I first started with all of this, I sure didn't think it was going to happen to me. Never. Why would it? But it can, and it does. So we need to be educating these parents. These parents need to be having talks with the children. We need to have more resources for these kids. Like Tina mentioned, mental health and substance use disorder go hand in hand. There's not typically one without the other.
You two are terrific mothers, and you're incredible resources to your communities.
Thank you.
thank you.
Deena and Tina, thank you for joining us today. Sharing your stories, I know it can be hard, but I think understanding the impact that this problem has on families and the ripple effects that it has on people around them is important. And getting rid of the stigma that surrounds the overdose is critical, I think, for us to start talking about the problem and figuring out ways to address it. So I very much appreciate you guys being here and just being willing to share. And I hope that what you've said will help maybe prevent another family from going through it.
Thank you. I hope so too.